Nobody is coming to save you. We've all heard that expression. And that's what I want to touch on today. So welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. And like I mentioned, you typically hear this sentiment sometimes expressed as "you're on your own," generally to encourage people to seek out training or to inspire them to take more control over their own security and kind of being their own first responder. I think it's important to really pay attention to the sentiment, though, because it extends far beyond that. And that's what I want to talk about today. Generally speaking, when people say you're on your own or nobody's coming to save you, what they're talking about is when you find yourself in a defensive encounter, you're the first person there that really has the potential to solve the problem. And as such, it behooves you to be equipped with the appropriate knowledge, skills, and abilities to do so. 100% agree. But bear in mind that you're on your own also applies to the advice that you take from other people, with very limited exception. It's true in your training to some degree, depending on the integrity of the instructors, but where it's most applicable is in the discourse that you see on social media. And this can be anything from, Reddit to Facebook to YouTube. It really doesn't matter. But the problem is that you really need to vet and qualify all this advice, because you're the one that's going to have to kind of stand and justify your actions. The catalyst for this was in one of the Facebook groups. Someone was asking questions about the finer points of how to carry in a workplace that, by their words, discouraged it. They didn't go into any detail as to whether or not it was actually against policy, but there was a lot of very well-intentioned but tragically misguided advice. And, excuse me, if you are a follower of this channel for any period of time and you know me, you know that this topic in particular is one that is deeply personal to me. So a lot of the people that were sharing their experiences were trying to help, but the experiences weren't relevant. Many of them were talking about, I had to wear a suit and tie at this wedding and this, that, and the other, and sharing anecdotes that did not translate to the context of the original poster. And that's problematic because if you take it at face value, it can create this false sense of success. The truth of the matter is that if you're carrying at a social event, not only are the consequences generally dramatically lower than in a professional setting, but, worst case scenario, like if you're attending an Indian wedding, for example, my understanding is that's like a 3-day event. But most sort of Western weddings, 3 to 6 hours tops. And so you're in reasonably close proximity for, let's call it 4 hours to people that may or may not know you. It's a lot harder to give off tells and for people to pick up tells in that short period of time, especially when they don't have a benchmark of who you are and how you behave. And again, worst case scenario, you're asked to leave or you create a socially awkward situation. Nothing about that has any real long-term impact to your emotional, professional, or financial well-being. And so the other problem is there were a few people that were chiming in that were not so well-intentioned. And it was very clear that they were just sort of desperately clawing at an attempt of being relevant and sort of, the Ralph Wiggum, I'm helping, when their contribution was much more for their own egotistical benefit than it was for the development of the person asking the question. And so this can be about something like concealment. It can be about the finer points of deadly force law. It can be about a myriad of things. But what's critically important to remember is, number one, if you're not paying this person for their advice and expertise, then it is incumbent on you to sort of filter and, to a degree, research the advice they're giving to make sure that it is applicable and appropriate for your context. If you are paying them for their advice and expertise, then it's not necessarily an inappropriate question to ask as to if they have testified to that previously, or if they would be willing to testify on your behalf. That was one of the big things that kind of set an impression with me when I took my first firearms class, which was Tactical Responses Fighting Pistol back in like 2009. Was James at the end of the class stood up and said that in the event that one of his students was involved in a defensive shooting, he would travel to them and he would testify in court on their behalf. And I know that there are instructors out there that kind of actively state that as a value proposition for their student base. Not saying that it's essential, not saying that if instructors don't or won't do that it makes them bad people, but something to consider. Because the entire point of this, and the thing that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way, was people were being very cavalier with advice that they were giving that had the potential for life-altering consequences for this person. And, excuse me, I've said it before, and I made a post about this on my Facebook page, where somebody who gives you any degree of advice, if they're wrong, they're not going to serve your sentence. They're not going to cut you a check for severance while you get back on your feet trying to find a new job. They're not going to pay your medical bills. So they can kind of say whatever they want because they are not going to have to endure the fallout if they're wrong. And so this is twofold. On the receiving side of that, be very cautious about where you get your information, because there's a lot of people out there that have that sort of very consequence-free attitude towards their statements. And the flip side of that is the best quality instructors are ones that really take that to heart. The one I'm going to mention specifically, a friend of mine, John Johnston, over at Citizens Defense Research. He's not the only person to express this, but he's certainly one of the first that I have heard state it publicly as an instructor, is that he takes the fact that if instructors, the we of that community get it wrong, I'm not lumping myself in with them, I'm kind of paraphrasing his quote, but what he said is, if we get it wrong, people get killed or people get hurt. And that is the type of real integrity that you want to look for in the people that are giving you that advice. Because when they take it that seriously, they are going to be very intentional about what they put out. And so just bear that in mind, that it is up to you to make sure that everything that you're taking in gets filtered through. Is this applicable? Is it relevant? Is it legal? Is it prudent? All this stuff to make sure that it actually applies to your context. And so you're on your own here. Doesn't matter who you've trained with, who you have taken advice from. I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that even unless something is just grossly negligent, you're not necessarily going to be able to hold somebody accountable for bad advice. So just bear that in mind. Unfortunately, the internet is awash with people with nothing more than an internet connection and an opinion, without any real experience or expertise to back it up. And there's a lot of folks out there that can make very compelling arguments or compelling statements, and they're either just flat out wrong, or they're just regurgitating second and third hand information without any true understanding and ownership of it. So this is just kind of a PSA and a caution, because it's something that, again, like I said, really didn't sit right with me. And I want everybody to be aware because, again, at the end of the day, you're on your own. So I hope everybody has a fantastic week. Stay dangerous and stay sharp.